So welcome to Macros and Caloric Needs, Part 1 out of a 3-part series. So the type and amount of food you eat every single day plays a huge role in health and serves as one of, if not the biggest levers in improving health and metabolism. Chronically undereating can lead to a wide range of negative symptoms like poor sleep, low body temperatures, hormonal problems, digestive problems, edema, not being able to lose fat easily, and more. But massively overeating and gaining fat quickly is a problem as well. However, the more calories we can consume without gaining weight, the better, meaning higher metabolic rate. It is a good thing to be able to eat a lot of food without gaining weight, a sign of a good metabolism. It is not a good thing to chronically undereat and downregulate our metabolisms. We need to start normalizing being able to eat more food without gaining weight, instead of normalizing low-calorie diets. So this is an important topic, this whole macros and caloric needs. So we've decided to divide this into a 3-part module. So in this section, we'll discuss what are macronutrients, so carbs, fat, and protein, brief intro to how to track macros and why it is a useful tool, and then a discussion of where to start in establishing your current baseline, what you're doing right now. In the next module, we'll discuss more in depth determining your own calorie intake and macronutrient split. And then in a 3rd part, I'll go into some nuances, especially for very damaged metabolic states. So how do you know how much food you're eating? So we recommend tracking macronutrients, not just calories, as calories can be filled in a number of ways, and tracking macronutrients indirectly tracks calories. So if this whole conversation of macros really stresses you out at this point in time, you can just use the meal plans we provide at various calorie ranges, which utilize a few different macro splits and cover micronutrient targets. However, tracking macros is a very valuable tool for health optimization and weight loss, so we really recommend trying it for a period of time. You can learn a lot about yourself very quickly and see drastic improvements in weight, body composition, and how you feel day to day with energy levels. So what are macros? Macros is short for macronutrients. So the 3 macronutrients include carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. When someone is talking about a macro split, this refers to the breakdown of carbs, protein, and fat in their diet, meaning the percentage of calories that come from carbs, the percentage of calories that come from protein, and the percentage of calories that come from fat. So, for example, for a 2,200 calorie diet, a 45% carb, 30% fat, and 25% protein split would be 247 grams of carbs, 73 grams of fat, and 137 grams of protein. No, I am not saying you should follow this. I am just giving an example of what a macronutrient split is. So many of us have been led to believe that all that matters for weight management is calories. And while calories certainly play a role, for example, you can't lose weight while you're eating in a significant caloric surplus, the percentage of your calories that you consume that are carbs, protein, and fat can have an impact on overall metabolism and thus on your physique, energy levels, and energy production, your recovery, thyroid health, and overall health, largely because macro splits can impact the calories out side of the equation. The better our body is at producing and utilizing energy, the higher our calories out, so we can consume more calories in. So now we're going to review the significance of each macronutrient and provide suggested ranges of each, which you can then see in practice within the meal plan section of the guide. So let's start with macronutrients 101. First up, carbs. So some amount of our intake is stored as glycogen for later use, both in the muscles, muscle glycogen, and in the liver glycogen. Yep, carbs are so important for energy, blood sugar regulation, our brains, and intense activity and movement that our body needs to store some for immediate access. One of the main functions of the liver is maintenance of our blood glucose levels, and the liver releases glucose by degrading its glycogen stores. This reserve isn't huge, and it gets depleted during our overnight fast when we sleep, requiring replenishment the next day. Of course, the body can make carbs from fats and protein through a process called gluconeogenesis, but an upregulation of this pathway requires a higher activation of stress hormones. And of course, carbs are also used as our main energy source. And on the calorie unit of measurement, to develop some understanding of how much energy is coming in from eating food, the calories are 4 calories per 1 gram of carb. So carbs are our body's preferred energy source for a number of organ systems across the body, like red blood cells, cells in the central nervous system, various tissues in the eye, like the lens and retina. We will never be able to fully use carbs 100% for fuel, and that's not the goal, as fats play an important role too. But carbs are necessary for a high-functioning, efficient metabolism and should not be feared. Not to mention, our brains and our central nervous system alone require about 100 to 120 grams of carbs every single day. So with extra activity, stress, other organ systems, muscle, strength training, we require carbs to properly fuel ourselves and give the body the tools it needs. Carbs are also protein sparing, meaning more of the protein that we consume can be used to build muscle and other structures in our tissues. And less of that protein is used up for gluconeogenesis to make carbs that our body needs. Carbs can also really help with muscle recovery. Eating carbs is something many are now afraid of due to the false claims that carbs make you fat. That simply is not true. Energy surpluses in parallel with damaged metabolisms make you fat, meaning eating more calories than your body needs at this point in your journey. In fact, research demonstrates that fat gain from carbohydrates is extremely low. The process of converting dietary carbs we eat into body fat on our body is called de novo lipogenesis, and de novo lipogenesis was shown to only contribute to about 1.4% of our fat gain. Study participants consumed a caloric surplus, meaning they consumed more calories than their body needed, and the diet was high in both carbs and fat. Their fat gain largely came from the high dietary fat, and this makes sense. Storing carbs as body fat via de novo lipogenesis is inefficient for the body. On the flip side, storing dietary fat in body fat reserves is much easier and more efficient. It doesn't make sense to burn dietary fat for energy and then laboriously convert all the carbs to make fatty acids for storage. It is much more efficient to simply burn the carbs for energy and then store the extra dietary fat, since it's already in the form of fatty acids. So you don't get fat from carbs. You get fat from overeating food for your current needs. And this will change as you improve your metabolism. So when you are eating in a caloric surplus, most of your fat gain is coming from your extra dietary fat, since it takes less work and your body is efficient and will choose this easier path, which doesn't make fat bad, but we should all be eating an amount of food appropriate for our needs at this point. So in summary, don't fear carbs. You do not have to consume super high carb, but you should consume them in an amount that is appropriate for your current stage. So just for awareness, here's some examples of pure carb sources, and we will dive into this in a future module, Carbohydrates 101, but just for a little intro. So we've got fruit juices, potatoes, rice, sourdough bread, masa harina flour, other flours, maple syrup, honey, vegetables, and sugar. So many people categorize donuts and other crap junk food as carbs. Sure, all of these items have carbs in them, but these carbs consist of highly refined, genetically modified grains and flours laced with pesticides, toxic vegetable oils, food colorings, fortified iron, additional natural flavors, and Lord knows what else. These foods, literally can't even call them food, are made to be addictive and have very little nutritional value. For example, a Krispy Kreme glazed donut. Here's the ingredient list. Enriched wheat flour with added iron and other vitamins, water, palm oil, soybean oil, sugar, yeast, soy lecithin, hydrogenated soybean oil, mono and diglycerides, salt, wheat, gluten, dried milk powder, cellulose gum, lecithin, maltodextrin, ascorbic acid, and so much more. The list goes on. And the macros for a Krispy Kreme donut include 22 grams of carbs and 11 grams of fat, likely all PUFA. So that is not really food, and it's not the carbs that are causing problems in that donut. Donuts made from scratch at home using much healthier fats and better ingredients and better flour can be totally fine to consume. Next up, dietary fats. So fats are also used as an energy source for various organ systems in the body, like our muscles at rest or low intensity movement, like walking. Our heart uses fat for fuel, and the cells that line our guts, to name a few. Fats are also important structural components, as the fats we eat make up structures throughout the body. They're important for hormones and the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. Fats trigger the release of bile acids, which help digest food and have antimicrobial and anti-endotoxin properties. Fats slow blood sugar release with meals and improve satiety. They also make food really delicious, but we don't need to overconsume fats to achieve these benefits. On the calorie energy measurement scale, while carbs were 4 calories per 1 gram, fats are 9 calories per 1 gram, so they're more energy dense. A single gram of fat contains more calories. When we talk about the amount of fat in the diet, the percentage of calories and the type of fat matters a lot. So a clear distinction needs to be made between a high PUFA fat diet versus a high saturated fat diet, as they're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. So we discussed this extensively in a future module called the types of fat to eat and cook with, and the PUFA section. But briefly, the types of fatty acids in the fats we consume have a significant impact on the structure of our cells, our hormonal health, as well as metabolism, glucose utilization, and body composition. So the fatty acid breakdown, aka beta oxidation of saturated fatty acids, produces energy optimally via oxidative phosphorylation through the electron transport chain. So saturated fats are supportive of the optimal energy process we see with proper carb metabolism, oxidative phosphorylation, serving as a good fuel source. Saturated fats lower cortisol, stimulate the PDH enzyme, which makes you metabolize carbs better, are beneficial for liver health, help you absorb fat-soluble vitamins, and can protect against endotoxin. So polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs, on the other hand, are not good fuel macronutrients. So they are cell signaling and structural fats, so we should not overconsume them. They are unstable molecules that can produce a lot of toxic and damaging free radicals in our bodies when cells are in reductive stress. So the types of fat we consume play a huge role in our metabolism, and consuming a high PUFA diet can severely hinder metabolism. And we go a lot more in depth into this in future modules discussing PUFAs. So for now, here's some examples of pure fats that are higher in saturated fats include beef fat or beef suet, bone marrow, coconut oil, butter, ghee, and cream. Those are more pure fats. And then many protein sources also contain fats. So whole milk, eggs, fatty cuts of meat, full fat yogurt and cottage cheese, and cheese. So while carbs and fat can serve as energy sources, protein is an important structural component of our bodies. It is inefficient as an energy source, so we don't need to overconsume protein, but it can be used as one if carb consumption is low through a process called gluconeogenesis. So we, of course, need to make sure we consume enough protein, because if the diet doesn't contain enough protein to maintain the essential organs, especially the heart, lung, and brain, our skeletal muscles can be broken down to supply proteins for these organs. So we should consume enough bioavailable protein to maintain our muscle and organ tissue mass, as well as support liver health and basically every other function in the body, since our bodies use protein to make hormones and enzymes. So on the calorie unit of measurement, protein is 4 calories per gram. Protein has the highest thermic effect of all macronutrients, meaning our body expends more calories digesting and breaking down protein relative to carbs and fat. So examples of pure protein sources include chicken breast, lean cuts of beef and pork, egg whites, non-fat, low-fat yogurt or cottage cheese, protein powder, broth, collagen, and gelatin. And then sources that contain protein along with fats and or other carbs include whole milk. So whole milk contains carbs, fat, and protein. Reduced fat milk that contains carbs and protein. Fatty cuts of meat contain fat and protein. Full fat yogurt and cottage cheese contain fat and protein and some carbs. And then cheese and eggs contain fat and protein. So in short, carbs and fats give us energy, and fats and protein are what build structures in our bodies. Carbs and saturated fats should be the body's energy sources, and then protein and some fats serve as building blocks and structural components in the body. All three are absolutely essential, but finding a good ratio of the three is key for fueling your body optimally and feeling your best. So in the next module, we'll discuss about how many carbs you should be consuming, how much fat, how much protein. But there's a vital first step, and that is establishing your baseline. How much are you currently consuming? If we don't know where we're currently at, how can we expect to improve? So this activity will also help you learn how to track your macros and get a good handle on your baseline. Will also help you avoid unnecessary fat gain while working to optimize your metabolism and tweak your calories or macros. Macros give you the data to measure your intake as you nourish yourself to meet your goals. Chronically undereating can downregulate our metabolisms and lead to a number of health problems. Our body needs energy to perform all of its functions. But on the flip side, if you massively increase calories rapidly, you're likely going to gain some weight. So tracking macros can help us avoid these large swings in weight loss and weight gain. Tracking macros is also a great way to assess if we're eating adequate levels of micronutrients or if we are missing important nutrients in our diet. And above all else, tracking macros is an invaluable learning tool since most of us don't grow up learning what fats, carbs, protein, and calories are. It takes time and practice to understand these things on a more intuitive level. You do not have to track macros for forever, but by learning how to properly fuel your body, you can develop better nutritional habits that don't always rely on quantitative tracking, but instead habits. So portion sizes, macro splits for given meals, balancing important ratios, etc., simply because you've developed a better understanding of what enough fuel looks like for you. Okay, so how to actually do this first step. So we recommend starting by keeping a food diary and tracking your macros for 3 to 10 days. Try to continue eating how you've been over the last few weeks or months in order to accurately gauge your starting point. The more honestly you reflect with what you've been doing, the better off you will be a few months from now. So tracking your macros then determines the amount of calories you're consuming day to day. It's likely not going to be consistent day to day, but you can at least see some trends and averages. So a very easy way to do this is to use a tracking app and a food scale. So you can either eyeball portions or weigh out your food using a food scale, which will give you the most accurate results. And you can pick up one of these for $20 to $30. So make sure you are recording and data entry into an app in terms of cooked versus raw. So for example, 4 ounces of raw ground beef, or did you measure 4 ounces of cooked ground beef? Either one is fine. Just make sure that you stay consistent. And when you are just starting and trying to determine your baseline of where you're at, one option is to just write down what you eat throughout the day on a piece of paper or on a note in your phone. And then at the end of the day or week, log all of that food in an app to see trends for macros and micros. So for tracking your macros on an app, you can use whichever app you would like, but our preference is Chronometer. So Chronometer houses all the macronutrient and micronutrient data for a wide variety of food. So all you need to do is monitor what food and how much of each food, and then Chronometer will give you all the data. You can get the basic free version or the paid gold version that is $49 per year. And both can be logged on and used on a computer or on your phone. So my suggestion is to just start with the free version and use that on your desktop as you learn how to track and just see what your current routine is at. And then you can upgrade to the gold version over time on your phone. I really like the gold version because you can separate your different meals like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it just has more features. So now I'll show an example of tracking a day of food on the free computer version. Now, again, this is just an example to show you how to do this. Okay, so here is a screen of Chronometer, the free version, and I'm just going to show you how to log a meal. So I already logged 2 example meals, and again, this is the free version, so you can't separate the items into breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So it's just a list of the day. So as an example, let's just say for breakfast you had 1 cup of orange juice, 2 eggs, some potatoes, and you estimated it was about 1 cup of potatoes, boiled potatoes. You had 1 ounce of beef liver, you had 1 ounce of cheese, and 1 cup of milk. Again, just an example. Let's say you had this for breakfast. And then for lunch, you had some strawberries, which you estimated was about 1 cup halves. You had about 4 ounces of ground beef, and 1 cup of bone broth, 1 cup of cooked white rice, with 1 tablespoon of butter. So these are just examples of breakfast, lunch. Now let's log an example dinner. So let's say you had some grilled skewers on the grill. So it had some pineapple chunks in it. So let's say it was about, here you can change, you can say grams if you measured it. So let's say you measured, you had 100 grams of pineapple, or if you are just estimating 1 cup of pineapple, click that, add to diary. And then let's say the skewers also contain some shrimp. You had shrimp skewers, and you can choose what applies to you. So shrimp cooked from fresh. And let's say that you had, they were medium size and there was about 15 on the skewer. And then let's say you also enjoyed another cup of raw milk. Again, just as an example, click that, and grams, if they only give grams, 1 cup is 240, add to. So let's say you then had a little bit of dark chocolate with that meal as a little dessert. So let's see, 1 miniature size, you had a bite, let's say regular size bar, and you had like 0.25 of that. Okay. So add that to the diary. So again, this is just an example. And so this would be all of the food that you consume that day. And then if you scroll down, you can then get, Chronometer outputs the macros. So the macros for this example, again, this is not what I consumed today, just an example, were 109 grams of protein, 203 grams of carbohydrates, and 65 grams of fat. And then it will, of course, output the calories by multiplying those by the appropriate amount of, so protein is 4 calories per 1 gram, carbs is 4 calories per 1 gram, and fat is 9 calories per 1 gram. So Chronometer takes care of all that math. And then you can see all of your micronutrients. So it gives, on the left, it gives the types of carbs, and it lists the amount of fiber that you had. It gives the types of fat, which I think is important. We want to limit our PUFA consumption here. And then it gives you the amount of each amino acid in your protein intake. So the macros are on the left side, and then on the right side are the micronutrients. So you can see your vitamins, you can see your minerals. So again, this is just an example of how to track a simple day of eating in the basic version of Chronometer. One thing that I do want to point out is when you add your food, so again, this button here, add your food, and let's say we're going to do raw honey. So you had some raw honey on this day. Something to note is look at how many entries there are, right? So we have an abundance of entries, and you just want to make sure that the entry has micronutrients logged. And the way you can determine that is if you click here, you then see right here 70 total nutrients. The more nutrients logged, the better, because then you can get a better estimate of your micronutrient intake that you're getting. And so let's compare that to here, only 7 listed nutrients. Here, only 15 listed nutrients. So I would go with this one. And then same thing for, like, for example, let's say bone broth. So bone broth here, 80 listed nutrients, that's good. Whereas, like, let's say you chose some amount here, only 15 listed nutrients. So pay attention to the entry. And it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay when you're choosing the foods that you consume. So just a few more notes about Chronometer. You can also log supplements, which can add to your micronutrients. So let's say that you're going to have some vitamin E, and you can choose your brand. So like, let's say it's with Thorn, that's going to come up, different Thorn vitamins, or if it's with MitoLife or whichever brand you choose. If that isn't there, you can then add your own. So see this custom section. So you can go to custom and you can create a custom food and enter the information on the nutrient label. So again, you can enter, for example, how much vitamin E is in this supplement, and that would show up here. And then that can be logged onto your foods list. So let's go back to the diary, and let's say we're going to add some magnesium to the day. In the all section, so magnesium. And let's say that, I don't know, I'm just going to choose one random one that came up. I don't use this, but I'm just giving an example. So that's added to the list, and then that's going to add to your magnesium intake here. And I do want to point out the fat-soluble vitamins are not always going to be accurate in Chronometer. For one, Chronometer does not indicate the difference between vitamin K1 and vitamin K2. Plus, a lot of the food entries in the database do not include the K2 information. So let me just show an example. If we go to an egg and we go to the nutrients that are in an egg. So let's go down to the vitamins. So you can see it's very low in vitamin K, but we all know that pasture-raised eggs are very rich and are one of the best sources of vitamin K2. So vitamin K2 is one of the nutrients that may not show up here. And so kind of just being aware of the food that you're consuming and making sure that you're consuming animal fats, you will hit your K2 target, or you can supplement with a good vitamin K2 product. Also, vitamin D is very hard to hit from just food alone, but if you're getting sunlight, that is an essential nutrient there. And vitamin E can be low from certain food sources as well. So just be cognizant of the fat-soluble vitamins. And again, retinol, they don't really distinguish between beta-carotene and other vitamin A. So these are the vegetable vitamin A, which is different than retinol, which is in animal fats. And so just be cognizant of the fat-soluble vitamins. Now, for logging your food and logging your entries in the macro tracking app, you can either weigh your food using a food scale, which you can get one for $20 to $40. This is the more accurate way, and I would definitely recommend this for any weight loss or fat loss phases. Alternatively, you can just eyeball and estimate serving sizes. For example, that was about 1 cup of rice. So make sure that your recording and your data entry into the app match in terms of cooked versus raw. For example, 4 ounces of raw ground beef or 4 ounces of cooked ground beef. It doesn't matter which one you do. Either one is fine. Just make sure you stay consistent so you don't track 4 ounces of raw ground beef even though you measured 4 ounces of cooked ground beef. Now, when you are just starting and trying to determine your baseline of where you're at, one option is to just write down what you eat throughout the day on a piece of paper or on a note on your phone. And then at the end of the day or week, log the food on Chronometer or another app that you prefer to see trends for macros and micros. So to summarize this macro part 1 module, we discussed what macronutrients are, carbs, fat, and protein, how to track macros, and that step 1 is to determine our baseline. So how much food we have been consuming over the last few weeks or months, our starting point. In the next module, I will cover how to determine your maintenance calories and macro splits. So how to fill these calories with the right amount of carbs, fat, and protein. So to summarize this macro part 1 module, we discussed what macronutrients are, carbs, fat, and protein. We also discussed how tracking your macronutrient intake is a valuable tool to understand where your diet currently stands and how it can be modified to improve health and function. The amount and type of food we eat every day serves as the biggest lever of improving health. often more than any supplement you can ever find. So we can really do some health optimization by ensuring we are eating enough food, eating the right types of food, and in the right amounts. We also challenge you with a task, which is to establish your baseline. How much food you've been consuming over the last few weeks or months, your starting point, what your typical normal is right now. Now, in the next module, I'll cover how to determine your maintenance calories and what an ideal macronutrient split is. So the amount of carbs, fat, and protein.